This is the true account of the Panar leopard, a man-eating predator that terrorized the Kumaon region of northern India in the early 1900s, claiming the lives of approximately 400 people before it was finally stopped. The hunt for this leopard stands as one of the most significant and deadly wildlife conflicts in recorded history, remembered not only for the unprecedented number of victims, but for the way it transformed an entire region's relationship with the wilderness that surrounded their homes. The hills of Kumaon stretched endlessly across the northern reaches of the United Provinces, their forested slopes rising toward the distant peaks of the Himalayas. In the early years of the 20th century, these mountains held countless villages where generations of hill people had lived in harmony with the wild creatures that shared their domain. The thick forests of oak, rhododendron, and pine provided shelter for leopards, bears, and tigers, while the terraced fields carved into the hillsides sustained the farming communities that had called this region home for centuries. It was in this landscape of ancient coexistence that the Panar leopard first struck in 1901. The village of Panar, nestled in a valley between two ridges, seemed no different from hundreds of other settlements scattered across the Kumaon hills. Stone houses with slate roofs clustered together, their walls designed to withstand the harsh mountain winters. Narrow paths wound between the dwellings, connecting families who had known each other for generations. The surrounding forests provided firewood, medicinal plants, and grazing for cattle, while the terrace fields produced enough grain to sustain the community through the changing season. The first attack occurred on a moonless night in late autumn. A woman had stepped outside her home to secure livestock before retiring for the evening. Her family heard her scream, then silence. When morning came, they found only bloodstains on the ground and drag marks leading toward the dense forest that pressed close against the village boundaries. The tracks were unmistakably those of a large leopard, but the boldness of the attack troubled the village elders. Leopards occasionally took goats or dogs, but they rarely attacked humans so close to inhabited areas. Within days, the leopard struck again. This time, the victim was an elderly man who had risen before dawn to tend his small vegetable garden. The attack happened so quickly and quietly that his wife, sleeping inside their stone house, heard nothing. She discovered his absence only when she woke to find him gone and traces of blood near their doorway. The drag marks led into the same section of forest, confirming that a single leopard was responsible for both attacks. News of the killing spread quickly among the interconnected villages of the region. Messengers carried word along the mountain paths, warning neighboring communities to take precautions. Yet even as people began securing their homes more carefully at night, the attacks continued with increasing frequency. The leopard seemed to possess an uncanny ability to find victims, despite the precautions villagers took. It struck in different locations within the village boundaries, never establishing a predictable pattern that might allow people to avoid its hunting grounds. By the end of the year, the Panar leopard had killed 12 people. Each attack followed a similar pattern. The leopard would approach the village under cover of darkness, select a victim who was alone or separated from others, and drag the body into the forest before anyone could respond. The speed and silence of these attacks created an atmosphere of growing dread among the villagers, who began to understand that they were facing a predator unlike any they had encountered before. As the months passed, the leopard's hunting behavior became more predictable in some ways, while remaining frustratingly unpredictable in others. It consistently hunted at night, almost always during the darkest hours before dawn. It showed a preference for victims who were alone, whether they were outside their homes for practical reasons or had become separated from groups. Most disturbing was its apparent lack of fear regarding human habitation. While normal leopards avoided areas with strong human scent and activity, the Panar leopard seemed drawn to the edges of human settlement. The leopard demonstrated remarkable cunning in its approach to potential victims. It appeared to study the routines of villagers, learning when individuals were most likely to be alone and vulnerable. Women who went to collect water from wells or streams, men who rose early to tend livestock, children who strayed too far from adult supervision during evening play all became targets for the patient predator that had made the forests around Panar its hunting ground. Efforts to track and kill the leopard began almost immediately after the first attacks. The village headman organized hunting parties composed of local men armed with old rifles, spears, and traditional weapons. These groups would enter the forest during daylight hours, following the drag marks left by the leopard after each attack. However, the dense vegetation and rocky terrain of the Kumaon hills provided countless hiding places for a creature that knew the landscape intimately. The hunting parties would find the remains of victims, confirming the leopard's presence, but the animal itself remained elusive. The leopard's kills followed a pattern that revealed both its intelligence and its adaptation to hunting humans. Unlike its natural prey, humans could not be brought down with the quick throat bite that leopards typically used on deer or other animals. Instead, the Panar leopard developed a technique of grabbing victims by the head or shoulders, using its powerful claws to maintain grip while delivering a crushing bite that quickly silenced its prey. This method minimized the time during which victims could cry out for help, reducing the chances that other villagers would respond quickly enough to drive the leopard away. After making a kill, the leopard would drag its victim deep into the forest, often traveling considerable distances before stopping to feed. This behavior made recovery of bodies extremely difficult and dangerous for the villagers who attempted to track the animal. The leopard seemed to understand that human pursuit would follow each attack, and it consistently chose feeding sites that were difficult to reach and provided multiple escape routes should searchers approach. By next year, the Panar leopard had established a reign of terror that extended far beyond the village of Panar itself. Word of the continuing attacks had spread throughout the Kumaon region, carried by traders, government officials, and relatives who traveled between villages. The leopard's reputation grew with each telling, and many began to believe that they were dealing with something more than an ordinary predator. The psychological impact on the local population was profound. Villages that had never experienced leopard attacks began taking precautions as if the animal might appear at any moment. Women refused to venture out alone after dark, even for urgent tasks. Men began traveling in groups whenever possible, and children were kept close to adult supervision at all times. The natural rhythm of village life, which had evolved over generations to accommodate the presence of wildlife, was fundamentally disrupted by fear of this single leopard. Religious and superstitious explanations for the leopard's behavior began to emerge among the hill people. Some believed that the animal was possessed by an evil spirit, pointing to its unusual boldness and apparent intelligence as evidence of supernatural influence. Others suggested that it was the reincarnation of a murdered person seeking revenge on the living. These beliefs were reinforced by the leopard's seeming invulnerability to conventional hunting methods and its ability to evade the most experienced trackers in the region. The leopard's hunting territory gradually expanded as it exhausted easy prey in the immediate vicinity of Panar. Attacks began occurring in villages several miles away, connected by the network of footpaths that crisscrossed the forested hills. The animal appeared to be learning the geography of human settlement throughout the region, identifying locations where villagers were most vulnerable and planning its attacks accordingly. During this period, the leopard's kill rate increased dramatically. Some months saw 10 or more victims, as the animal seemed to hunt with increasing confidence and skill. The bodies recovered by villagers showed that the leopard was becoming more efficient in its killing technique, suggesting that it was perfecting its adaptation to human prey through practice and experience. Government officials in the district headquarters began receiving reports of the escalating situation, but the remoteness of the affected area and the limited resources available to colonial administrators meant that effective assistance was slow to arrive. A few additional rifles were distributed to village headmen, and rewards were offered for the leopard's destruction, but these measures had little immediate impact on the animal's activities. The social fabric of the affected communities began to show signs of strain under the constant threat. Families started sleeping in groups rather than maintaining separate households, seeking safety in numbers. Some villagers abandoned their homes entirely, moving to stay with relatives in areas that had not yet been visited by the leopard. Traditional festivals and social gatherings were curtailed or canceled, as people became reluctant to move about after dark or gather in large groups that might scatter if attacked. As the death toll mounted, more serious efforts to destroy the leopard were organized by government authorities and local leaders. Professional hunters from other parts of India were contacted, and substantial rewards were offered to anyone who could kill the animal. These hunters brought modern rifles and years of experience tracking dangerous predators, yet they too found themselves frustrated by the Panar leopard's ability to avoid detection and pursuit. The leopard seemed to adapt its behavior in response to increased hunting pressure. It began varying its hunting grounds more frequently, never returning to the same village twice in quick succession. It also started using more difficult terrain for its approaches and retreats, favoring rocky areas and dense vegetation where tracking was nearly impossible. These adaptations suggested a level of learning and problem-solving that went beyond normal leopard behavior. Several close encounters occurred between the leopard and hunting parties during this period. Hunters would arrive at the site of a fresh kill to find the animal had been there only hours before, but despite their best efforts to track it, the leopard would disappear into the landscape as if it had never existed. On at least 2 occasions, hunters reported seeing the leopard at a distance, but by the time they could position themselves for a shot, it had vanished into the forest. The leopard's apparent intelligence became legendary among the people of Kumaon. Stories circulated of how it seemed to know when hunting parties were in the area, avoiding those sections of forest where armed men were searching. Some claimed that it could distinguish between ordinary villagers and hunters, showing much greater caution when professional trackers were present. Whether these stories were accurate or reflected the natural human tendency to attribute supernatural qualities to phenomena that could not be easily explained, they contributed to the growing belief that conventional hunting methods would never succeed against this particular animal. Meanwhile, the attacks continued with devastating regularity. The leopard had now killed well over 100 people, making it one of the most prolific man-eaters in recorded history. Entire villages had been effectively abandoned, as survivors fled to areas where they felt safer. The regional economy began to suffer, as trade routes became too dangerous to travel, and agricultural activities were curtailed by fear of leopard attacks. Local officials sent increasingly urgent reports to higher authorities, describing a situation that threatened to destabilize the entire region. The Panar leopard had become more than a wildlife problem. It was a crisis of governance and public safety that demanded immediate attention from the most skilled hunters available. In 1910, nearly a decade after the first recorded attack, the case of the Panar leopard came to the attention of Jim Corbett, a young forest officer and hunter who had already gained a reputation for successfully dealing with man-eating tigers and leopards in other parts of northern India. Born in the hill station of Nainital and raised among the forests of Kumaon, Corbett possessed an intimate knowledge of the region's terrain and wildlife that set him apart from other hunters who had attempted to track the leopard. Corbett was 25 years old when he first heard detailed accounts of the Panar leopard from government officials and local residents. Unlike many of the hunters who had previously attempted to kill the animal, Corbett approached the challenge with a deep understanding of leopard behavior and the specific conditions that might create a man-eater. He recognized that the leopard's success over nearly a decade indicated an animal of exceptional intelligence and adaptability, requiring hunting methods that went beyond conventional approaches. Before accepting the assignment to hunt the Panar leopard, Corbett spent considerable time interviewing survivors and witnesses to recent attacks. He studied the pattern of examining the locations, timing, and circumstances of each incident for clues about the leopard's hunting strategy. This systematic approach revealed details that previous hunters had overlooked, including subtle preferences in the leopard's choice of victims and attack sites. Corbett's analysis suggested that the leopard had developed a sophisticated understanding of human behavior and settlement patterns. It appeared to time its attacks to coincide with periods when village defenses were at their weakest, such as during harvest season when people worked long hours and were often outside before dawn or after dusk. It also seemed to prefer villages where recent deaths or other disruptions had made residents less vigilant about security measures. The most important insight from Corbett's preliminary investigation was his recognition that the leopard's extraordinary success as a man-eater was likely due to a specific injury or condition that had forced it to abandon its natural prey in favor of easier targets. He theorized that the animal might be old, injured, or otherwise unable to hunt the swift and agile deer that formed the normal diet of leopards in the region. This theory would prove crucial in determining how to approach the final hunt. Armed with this understanding, Corbett began planning a hunting strategy that took into account the leopard's demonstrated intelligence and caution. Rather than attempting to track the animal through the forest, he decided to wait for it to come to him, using himself as bait in locations where the leopard was most likely to hunt next. Corbett's approach to hunting the Panar leopard differed fundamentally from previous attempts. Instead of entering the forest with a large party of men and guns, he chose to work alone, or with a single local guide who knew the terrain intimately. This reduced the human scent and noise that might alert the leopard to his presence, while allowing him the flexibility to move quickly and quietly through the difficult mountain terrain. He began by studying the most recent attack sites, looking for clues about the leopard's current condition and hunting pattern. What he found confirmed his theory about the animal's motivation for becoming a man-eater. Tracks and other signs indicated that this was indeed an elderly leopard, probably suffering from injuries or age-related disabilities that had reduced its ability to hunt normal prey. The wear patterns on recovered claw marks suggested that the animal was favoring certain limbs, possibly due to old hunting injuries. Corbett established a base camp in a village that had recently experienced attacks, positioning himself where he could respond quickly to news of fresh kills or sighting. He spent days walking the forest paths and ridges, familiarizing himself with the terrain and identifying locations where the leopard might be vulnerable to a careful hunter. Unlike previous hunters who had focused on tracking the leopard after attacks, Corbett concentrated on predicting where it might strike next. The breakthrough came when Corbett realized that the leopard was following a rough circuit through its hunting territory, returning to previously successful areas after intervals of several weeks or months. By mapping the locations and dates of recent attacks, he was able to identify a pattern that suggested the leopard would soon return to an area near a village called Sem, where it had killed 2 people in the previous month. Corbett positioned himself in this area, building a small machan or platform in a tree that overlooked several paths leading to the village. He chose a location that provided good visibility, while keeping him downwind of the most likely approach routes the leopard might use. The machan was constructed to minimize human scent and visual profile, built with materials from the local forest that would blend naturally with the surrounding. For 3 nights, Corbett waited in complete silence, watching and listening for any sign of the leopard's presence. The forest around him was alive with the normal sounds of nocturnal animals, but he had trained himself to distinguish between ordinary wildlife activity and the subtle changes that might indicate the presence of a large predator. On the 3rd night, these changes began to occur. The first indication that something unusual was approaching came from the behavior of smaller animals in the forest. Monkeys that had been chattering in the trees fell silent, and the normal chorus of insects was interrupted by periods of unnatural quiet. Corbett had learned to read these signs during years of hunting in the Kumaon forests, and he recognized them as warnings that a major predator was moving through the area. The leopard appeared at the edge of Corbett's vision, like a shadow materializing from the darkness. It moved with the fluid grace characteristic of its species, but Corbett could see that his theory about its condition was correct. The animal favored its right front paw and moved with the deliberate care of an aged predator that could no longer rely entirely on speed and agility. Despite its disabilities, the leopard demonstrated the extraordinary stealth and awareness that had allowed it to evade hunters for nearly a decade. It paused frequently to test the air for scent and listen for sounds that might indicate danger. Its route toward the village followed a path that provided maximum cover while avoiding areas where ambush might be possible. The intelligence that had made it such a successful man-eater was clearly evident in every aspect of its approach. Corbett remained motionless in his machan, knowing that any sound or movement might alert the leopard to his presence. He had positioned himself with careful attention to wind direction and background cover, but the leopard's senses were acute enough to detect the smallest error in concealment. The distance between hunter and prey gradually decreased as the leopard continued along its chosen path toward the village, where it expected to find its next victim. The leopard passed directly beneath Corbett's position, close enough that he could see the details of its and the old scars that marked its body. It was indeed an elderly animal, probably over 15 years old, with the heavy build and grizzled appearance that came with age. Its teeth showed significant wear, another factor that would have contributed to its difficulty in hunting normal prey and its turn to easier human targets. As the leopard moved away from his position toward the village, Corbett faced the critical decision of when to take his shot. The animal was moving through broken forest cover that provided only brief opportunities for a clear shot, and the darkness made precise aim extremely difficult. He had only one chance to kill the leopard cleanly. A wounded animal would be even more dangerous and might escape to continue its killing. The leopard paused at the edge of a small clearing, silhouetted against the faint starlight that filtered through the forest canopy. For a moment, it stood completely still, perhaps sensing something unusual in its environment. This pause provided Corbett with the opportunity he had been waiting for, a clear shot at close range with minimal risk of wounding rather than killing the animal. Corbett's rifle was a .275 Rigby, a weapon he had chosen specifically for hunting in the dense forests of Kumaon. The caliber provided sufficient power to kill a leopard cleanly while being light enough for extended carrying through difficult terrain. He had practiced extensively with this rifle, learning to shoot accurately in poor light conditions and at the ranges typical of forest encounters. The leopard remained motionless in the clearing for perhaps 10 seconds, a brief window during which Corbett had to aim, fire, and hope that his shot would end the decade-long reign of terror that had claimed hundreds of lives. He aligned his sights carefully, compensating for the limited visibility and the slight downward angle from his position in the tree. His target was the leopard's chest, where a well-placed shot would penetrate the heart and lungs for an instant kill. The report of the rifle shattered the forest silence, and the leopard collapsed immediately where it stood. There was no dramatic leap or death struggle, just the sudden stillness that indicated a clean kill. Corbett remained in his machon for several minutes, watching carefully for any sign of movement that might indicate the leopard was only wounded. When he was certain the animal was dead, he climbed down from his position and approached the body with his rifle, ready for a follow-up shot if necessary. The Panar leopard was dead, but Corbett's examination of the carcass revealed important details about why it had become such a prolific man-eater. The animal was indeed elderly and showed signs of multiple old injuries that would have severely limited its hunting ability. Several teeth were broken or worn down to the point where they would have been ineffective for killing and eating normal prey. Its right front paw showed evidence of an old injury that had healed improperly, leaving the leopard with a permanent limp that would have slowed its pursuit of deer and other swift prey animals. These physical limitations had forced the leopard to seek easier prey, and humans represented the perfect solution to its hunting difficulties. People were large enough to provide substantial meals, soft enough to be killed and eaten despite damaged teeth, and predictable enough in their movements to be hunted successfully by an animal that could no longer rely on speed and agility. News of the Panar leopard's death spread throughout the Kumaon region with remarkable speed, carried by runners and messengers who traveled the mountain paths between villages. The reaction was one of profound relief, mixed with a kind of disbelief that the long nightmare had finally ended. Many villagers had begun to accept the leopard's presence as a permanent fact of life, adapting their routines and expectations to accommodate the constant threat of attack. Corbett's success, where so many others had failed, made him famous throughout northern India and established his reputation as one of the subcontinent's most skilled hunters of man-eating predators. However, he was careful to explain to local people and government officials that the Panar leopard had been an exceptional case, an animal whose specific injuries and circumstances had created a perfect storm of conditions for man-eating behavior. The final count of the leopard's victims was never precisely established, but evidence suggested that it had killed over 400 people during its 9-year reign of terror. This made it one of the most prolific man-eaters in recorded history, exceeding the kill counts of famous man-eating tigers and other leopards that had terrorized different regions of India. The scope of its impact on the local population was unprecedented, affecting not just direct victims, but entire communities whose lives had been disrupted by fear and the need for constant vigilance. In the weeks following the leopard's death, Corbett spent time in the affected villages, helping to restore confidence in the safety of normal activities. He explained to local leaders the signs that might indicate when leopards or tigers were turning to human prey, and he provided advice on precautions that could reduce the risk of future attacks. His knowledge of animal behavior and his success against the Panar leopard made him a trusted authority on wildlife management in the region. The economic and social recovery of the affected area took much longer than the initial relief that followed news of the leopard's death. Villages that had been abandoned were slowly reoccupied as people gradually regained confidence in their safety. Trade routes that had been closed due to the danger of leopard attacks were reopened, allowing the resumption of commerce that had been interrupted for years. Children who had grown up under the constant threat of attack slowly learned to play outside after dark, though many parents remained cautious for months or years afterward. The story of the Panar leopard became part of the oral tradition of the Kumaon region, told and retold with variations that sometimes emphasized the supernatural aspects of the leopard's behavior, and sometimes focused on the skill and courage required to track and kill such a dangerous animal. These stories served both as entertainment and as a way of preserving important lessons about the relationship between humans and wildlife in a region where such encounters remained a constant possibility. The case of the Panar leopard marked a turning point in understanding the conditions that could lead to man-eating behavior in large predators. Corbett's careful analysis of the leopard's physical condition and hunting patterns provided insights that would later inform efforts to prevent similar situations from developing. His recognition that man-eaters were typically animals that had been forced by injury or age to abandon their natural prey became an important principle in wildlife management. The hunt also demonstrated the importance of understanding local conditions and animal behavior when dealing with problem wildlife. Previous hunters had failed because they had applied generic tracking and hunting methods to a situation that required specialized knowledge and tactics. Corbett's success came from his willingness to study the specific leopard and its environment, developing a hunting strategy tailored to the particular circumstances of this case. For the people of the Kumaon region, the end of the Panar leopard's reign of terror represented more than just relief from a specific threat. It restored their confidence in their ability to coexist with the wildlife that shared their mountain environment. The knowledge that even the most dangerous predators could be dealt with through skilled hunting and careful planning allowed communities to resume their traditional ways of life while maintaining appropriate caution about wildlife encounters. The case also highlighted the broader challenges of wildlife management in regions where human populations and dangerous predators lived in close proximity. The colonial government's initial inability to respond effectively to the leopard attacks revealed the limitations of centralized administration in dealing with local wildlife problems. Future policies would need to account for the specialized knowledge and rapid response capabilities required to address such situations before they reached crisis proportion. Corbett himself would go on to hunt many other man-eating tigers and leopards throughout northern India, but he always regarded the Panar leopard as one of his most challenging and significant cases. The lessons learned from this hunt informed his approach to subsequent man-eater cases and contributed to his evolution from a hunter focused on killing problem animals to a conservationist interested in understanding and preventing the conditions that created such problems. The story of the Panar leopard occurred during a period of significant change in the relationship between humans and wildlife in India. The early 20th century saw increasing pressure on natural habitats as human populations grew and agricultural activities expanded into previously wild areas. These changes created more frequent contact between people and predators, increasing the likelihood of conflicts that might lead to man-eating behavior. At the same time, traditional methods of wildlife management that had been practiced by local communities for generations were being disrupted by colonial administration and changing economic conditions. Village hunters who might have dealt with problem leopards in earlier periods were often prevented from acting by new regulations or lacked access to effective weapons. This created a gap in wildlife management that contributed to the severity of cases like the Panar leopard. The colonial government's response to man-eating incidents was typically focused on immediate solutions rather than long-term prevention. Rewards were offered for killing problem animals, and professional hunters were eventually called in when local efforts failed. But little attention was paid to understanding why such incidents occurred or how they might be prevented in the future. This reactive approach allowed situations like the Panar leopard to develop into major crises before effective action was taken. The environmental conditions that existed in the Kumaon region during the early 1900s were ideal for sustaining a man-eating leopard. Dense forests provided cover for stalking and escape, while scattered human settlements offered numerous opportunities for attacks. The mountainous terrain made tracking and hunting extremely difficult, giving advantages to predators that knew the landscape intimately. These geographical factors, combined with the leopard's intelligence and adaptation to human prey, created a situation that challenged even the most experienced hunters. Understanding the Panar leopard case requires recognizing the complex interactions between environmental factors, animal behavior, human activities, and governance systems that combine to create one of history's most destructive wildlife conflicts. The successful resolution of the case demonstrated that even the most challenging wildlife problems could be solved through careful analysis, appropriate tactics, and skilled implementation, but it also highlighted the importance of early intervention to prevent such situations from developing. The Panar leopard's reign of terror lasted nearly a decade and claimed over 400 human lives, making it one of the most destructive wildlife conflicts in recorded history. The animal's success as a man-eater resulted from a combination of physical disabilities that forced it to abandon normal prey, exceptional intelligence that allowed it to adapt to hunting humans, and environmental conditions that favored its survival and mobility while hindering efforts to track and kill it. The case demonstrated both the vulnerability of rural communities to wildlife conflicts and their ultimate resilience in adapting to and overcoming such challenges. The people of the Kumaon region endured years of fear and disruption, fundamentally altering their daily lives to reduce the risk of leopard attacks. Yet they also preserved their communities and cultures through this ordeal, maintaining the social bonds and traditional practices that defined their way of life. Jim Corbett's successful hunt of the Panar leopard established him as one of India's most renowned hunters of man-eating predators and provided important insights into the behavior and management of problem wildlife. His methodical approach to understanding the leopard's condition and hunting patterns, combined with his intimate knowledge of the local environment, succeeded where conventional hunting methods had failed. The lessons learned from this case would inform wildlife management practices for decades to come. The story of the Panar leopard serves as a reminder of the complex relationships between humans and wildlife in regions where both populations must share limited space and resources. It illustrates the potential consequences when these relationships become unbalanced, as well as the possibility of restoring balance through understanding, skill, and appropriate action. The case remains relevant today as human populations continue to expand into wildlife habitats, creating new opportunities for conflicts that require the same careful analysis and strategic response that ended the Panar leopard's decade of terror. In the villages of Kumaon, the story continues to be told as both a cautionary tale and a testament to human resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The leopard's name has become synonymous with the dangers that can emerge from the wild forest, while Jim Corbett's name represents the possibility that even the most difficult problems can be solved through patience, knowledge, and courage. Together, they form a narrative that captures an essential truth about life in regions where civilization and wilderness meet, that coexistence requires constant vigilance, mutual respect, and the wisdom to act decisively when circumstances demand it. The end of the Panar leopard marked not just the death of a single predator, but the resolution of a crisis that had tested an entire region's capacity to adapt and survive. The scars left by nearly a decade of terror would fade with time, but the lessons learned would endure as part of the collective memory of communities that had faced the darkness and emerged into the light of a safer dawn.